καλωσορίζω, καθώς και με άλλους φορείς στην Ελλάδα. Οι εξελίξεις τρέχουν στην νότιο-ανατολική Μεσόγειο. Γνωρίζετε ότι το ενδιαφέρον της Ελλάδας και της Κύπρου είναι πολύ μεγάλο. Ασφαλώς όμως τρέχουν οι εξελίξεις και στη Συρία και στην Αίγυπτο. Και μέσα σε όλες αυτές τις αλλαγές προσπαθεί η χώρα μας αφενός να αντιληφθεί τι γίνεται, αφετέρου να χαράξει μία πολιτική. Γι' αυτό το λόγο καλέσαμε σήμερα εδώ τον καθηγητή και ερευνητή, τον δόκτορα Daniel Pipes, ο οποίος είναι ένας από τους παγκοσμίως καλύτερους ειδικούς στον χώρο της Μέσης Ανατολής. Ο Daniel Pipes θα σας πω λίγα λόγια για το έργο του και στη συνέχεια θα του δώσω το λόγο για την εισήγησή του, προσπαθώντας, γι' αυτό έχουμε συνεννοηθεί, να έχουμε χρόνο στο τέλος για να υπάρξουν ερωτήσεις και συζήτηση. Είναι λοιπόν Αμερικανός ιστορικός, συγγραφέας και πολιτικός σχολιαστής. Είναι ο πρόεδρος του Middle Eastern Forum, είναι το φόρουμ, ο οργανισμός ο οποίος εκδίδει και ήταν από τους ιδρυτές το περιοδικό Middle East Quarterly, σχεδόν 20 χρόνια τώρα, και έχει διδάξει ως επισκέπτης καθηγητής στο Hoover Institution του Πανεπιστημίου του Stanford, καθώς και σε άλλα πανεπιστήμια. Έχει διδακτορικό από το Harvard και, όπως ανέφερα, τα ερευνητικά του ενδιαφέροντα εστιάζονται στην αμερικανική εξωτερική πολιτική, ιδιαίτερα σε σχέση με την Μέση Ανατολή, το Ισλάμ και τον Ισλαμισμό. Έχει διδάξει εκτός από το Stanford, στο Σικάγο, στο Πανεπιστήμιο του Σικάγο, στο Harvard, στο Naval War College των Ηνωμένων Πολιτειών, ενώ έχει υπηρετήσει και στην Αμερικανική κυβέρνηση ως αντιπρόεδρος στο Fulbright Board of Foreign Scholarships και ήταν επίσης μέλος και επικεφαλής του US Institute of Peace. Διευθυντής επίσης από το 86 έως το 93 στο Foreign Policy Research Institute. Η ιστοσελίδα του, σε μία λέξη danielpipes.org, είναι μία από τις πιο συχνά προσβάσιμες διαδικτυακές πηγές για εξειδικευμένες πληροφορίες για τη Μέση Ανατολή και το Ισλάμ, ενώ ο ίδιος αρθρογραφεί συχνά στην Jerusalem Post, στα αμερικανικά μέσα μαζικής επικοινωνίας, και έχει σχολιάσει σε πολλά από αυτά. Έχει μια σειρά εκπομπών, BBC World News, Crossfire, Good Morning America, News Hour, etc. Έχει εκδώσει συνολικά 12 βιβλία, αρθρογραφεί σε διάφορα επιστημονικά περιοδικά, ενώ κείμενά του έχουν μεταφραστεί σε 33 γλώσσες, ξένες γλώσσες. Θεωρείται ως ένας από τους 100 ανθρώπους με επιρροή, με μεγαλύτερη επιρροή από τους αποφύτους του Πανεπιστημίου του Χάρβαρντ. Μιλά γαλλικά, αυτό ήταν κάτι κοινό, και διαβάζει αραβικά εδώ και πολλά χρόνια και γερμανικά. Απόψε θα αγγίξει 4 διαφορετικά θέματα, αλλά θα συνδέσει και τις σχέσεις της Ελλάδας, δηλαδή Συρία, Αραβική Άνοιξη, Αίγυπτος, Ιράν, Τουρκία, φυσικά Κύπρος και Ελλάδα. Επιστρέφει από ένα ταξίδι, ήταν πριν 2 εβδομάδες στο Ισραήλ μαζί με τον καθηγητή που γνωρίσατε εδώ πέρα, τον Εφράιμ Μπαρ, καθώς είχαν το Begin Sadat κέντρο, το Το κέντρο Μπικίνι Σαντάτ είχε ένα συνέδριο στο οποίο συμμετείχε, μας το έλεγε τότε, ο Ινμπάρ και ο Πρωθυπουργός του Ισραήλ και μια εβδομάδα περίπου στην Κύπρο, φυσικά μελετώντας τα συγκεκριμένα ζητήματα. Dr. Pipes, I would like to welcome you officially in our university. It is a pleasure having you with us, and we are all expecting to listen and learn from you about the politics and the events in the Middle East. You're a worldwide known scholar, and personally I consider a great honor having you with us today. The audience is filled with students, officers, middle and higher rank officers of the Hellenic Armed Forces, graduate students as well as undergraduate students. And as we agreed, I already told them that you will have your presentation and then we'll have the time for discussion. Thank you again for being with us here. The floor is yours. Here, I think. It's okay.
University. I'm also grateful that in this issue here you had a piece on Turkey. Thank you for contributing there. It's a delight for me to be here. I will speak fairly shortly so that there's plenty of time for questions and answers for discussion. I will take up 5 topics: Turkey, Syria, Egypt, Iran, and American foreign policy. But feel free to bring up other topics: Islam, Saudi Arabia, Arab-Israeli conflict, as you wish. So what I thought I would do is to structure my talk by the months. As you may recall, June, things were active in Turkey. July, they were active in Egypt. August, they were active in Syria. September was the month for Iran. We don't know yet what October is, but I'll go through those 4 months and then talk about American foreign policy. To begin with Turkey, on May 30th, there were demonstrations in Gezi Park that led to national demonstrations across the country. I think these were profoundly important. Or to put it differently, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, whose party came to office in 2002, did very well for the first 8-9 years of that period. Whether it be economic growth, dealing with the Kurdish issue, accession to the European Union, relations with Iran, United States, and other countries. He was popular, and he went from success to success. Unfortunately for him, this success gave him an arrogance and a confidence that he could do what he wanted. He then started making one mistake after another, most especially with Syria, where the Turkish involvement is highly unpopular, but also when it comes to the Kurds, the Alevis, Iraq, Israel, Egypt, mistake after mistake. And so what looked like a few years ago 0 problems with neighbors, as your article notes, is problems everywhere, domestic and international. And I think it is less about his Islamist program, less about his attempt to apply the Sharia, and more about his personality. Because what we have seen is that other leading figures in the AK party are disagreeing with him. In particular, the president, Abdullah Gül, is increasingly creating a distance between himself and Erdogan. So I don't think this is the Islamist project as a whole that's in trouble, because the alternative is not really evident. The CHP, the MHP are not serious parties with an intellectually important program, but rather it is the failings, the problems of Erdogan personally. And so the question today is whether the AKP will be able to push him to the side, or whether he will continue to be the dominant force in the AKP. If it manages to push him aside, then I think the AKP can recover and continue to succeed. There is no real opposition. If it does not push him aside, and he remains in power, then there's all sorts of trouble within the country, economically, conspiracy theories, the Kurds, the Alevis, Iraq, Israel, Syria, Egypt, and potentially Greece and Cyprus. Now, I think it's noteworthy that in the last 10 years, Greece and Cyprus have not been important issues in Turkey, in Turkish foreign policy. Other places have been, the ones I've mentioned, not Greece and Cyprus. But it could well be, and this is speculation on my part, it could well be that Erdogan, should he remain in power, decides that Syria is too difficult, Egypt's too difficult, he's going to return to the old topic of Greece, or topics of Greece and Cyprus. And I would not be surprised if he does something unexpected, something hostile, something aggressive. It could be warships in the exploratory waters south of Cyprus. It could be a release of illegal immigrants to the islands in the Aegean Sea. I can't tell you what it will be. But I would not be surprised if Erdogan stays in power, if he does something hostile of that nature. I think he's dangerous. Dangerous to himself, to his country, and to his neighbors. Second country is Egypt. On June 30th, in Egypt, what was probably the largest demonstration, political demonstration in human history, took place in Egypt. Nobody knows the exact count, but it's somewhere 10, 20, 30 million people. Nobody's ever seen the streets full of people as they were in Egypt. This was a huge event in modern Egyptian history, to have a substantial portion of the Egyptian population on the streets of Egypt. And what were they doing? They were saying no to Mohammed Morsi, no to the Muslim Brotherhood, no to Islamism. This is a remarkable development, because the Muslim Brotherhood, which is 85 years old, has been in some ways the key non-governmental organization in Egypt through the 20th century. It has been waiting for this moment to get to power. From the 1940s on, it has been wanting power. And finally it got power. I don't think through fair elections. I don't believe the elections of 2012 were honest, but they got power. And immediately, Mohammed Morsi and his colleagues went for more power and more power. Power, power, power was all that they thought about. They did not think about the economy. They did not think about personal security. They did not think about the cops. They did not think about anything except power, power, power. And very quickly, this created problems for Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood. And increasingly people rejected him and it, until it culminated in the demonstrations on June 30th. Just 3 days later, on July 3rd, the defense minister, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, pushed Morsi aside and created a new interim government. The government now faces two enormous problems. One is the division between Egyptians who supported the Muslim Brotherhood and those who were against it. Relations between them are very bad, within single families, between former friends, people who work together, very nasty relations between supporters and opponents of Islamism, of Muslim Brotherhood, of Morsi. These problems are getting worse with time. Secondly, the economics of Egypt are terrible. Every major source of income is down, of hard currency. Tourism, obviously, way down. Cotton crop is down. Remittances, money from places like Libya, is down. Tolls from the Suez Canal are down. Sales of gas and oil to Israel and Jordan are down. There's not enough money to pay the bills, so that Egypt now has become dependent on aid from the Gulf, from Saudi Arabia, from Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates. This can't go on. At a certain point, the Egyptians have to make their own money. They're in terrible situation in that Egypt imports more food in absolute and relative terms, let us say, more in amount and more in percentage than any other country on the globe. Some 70% of the caloric intake of Egyptians, 70% of their food, is imported from abroad, and they don't have the money to buy it. And worse than that is that the military, which is in charge, the interim government is not the key. It is the military government. It is Sisi and his colleagues who are running the country. They are the quarter of the Egyptian economy. Back in the 1950s, when the military first took power in Egypt, they started to take control of various industries. So whether it's bottled water, or paper, or diapers for babies, or macaroni, it's the military that's producing it. And the factories that were set up in the 1950s and subsequently are archaic socialist factories that are not competitive, that produce goods that people don't really want. But the military wants to continue with this system because if you're a retired colonel, you are the head of some factory and you do very nicely. You don't want to give that up. And the military is in charge. So it seems very hard to imagine that the military will open up the economy to entrepreneurship, free market, and other positive developments. It looks stuck. So in both these ways, the political and the economic, the tensions between the two sides, and the inability of Egyptians to make money, to be competitive, it appears that there won't be any changes for some time to come. It appears that Egypt is in very bad shape. It appears that there's hunger, and there might well be starvation. I can't predict for you which way this will go, but it looks very, very difficult indeed. Third month is August, Syria month. That was when the Syrian military used chemical weapons on August 21st against its own population, killing some 1,400. And a huge debate over this followed. It looked like the U.S. would attack, didn't, and now there's a process to try and destroy the chemical weapons. For me, the chemical weapons are something of a smaller issue than the main issue, which is where is Syria going? By way of background, the Syrian state, which is a modern state created by the French and the British in the First World War, the Syrian state has a dominant Sunni Muslim population, Arabic-speaking Sunni Muslim population. But it also has many minorities. Some of them don't speak Arabic, like the Kurds, and many of them are not Sunni, such as the Druze, the Christians, and the Alawis. The Alawis are what's called extreme Shiite sect, not extreme in a political sense, but in a religious sense, and that it comes out of Shiism, but it evolved away from Shiism. It is like some Christian sects, like the Mormons, who began in some way Christian, but are no longer Christian. The Alawis, formerly known as Nusayris, number about 2.5 million people, and they are in the northwest of the country. Historically, they were despised, they were poor, they were remote, they were far from power. But as a result of the French colonial control, the Alawis were favored, and by 1966, they took control. And for almost half a century now, Alawites have been in control. This is something very unpleasant, repugnant to the majority Sunni population. They suffered through it for 45 years. And finally, in March of 2011, they had their opportunity to make their voice heard, to protest. The regime responded with violence, and now for 2.5 years, there has been a civil war, vicious, brutal civil war with 120, 30, who knows, 1,000 deaths as a result. Initially, the Civil War moved quickly, and there were changes all the time. But by now, it has reached a certain stalemate, a stasis. There are not many changes anymore. In the northeast, there is a portion of Syria that is under Kurdish control. And the Kurds of the northeast of Syria are not interested in being part of Syria. They're interested in being part of a Kurdish entity. And in particular, just across the border in Iraq are the Kurds of Iraq, who already have an autonomous, quasi-independent polity, the Kurdish regional government of northern Iraq. So the Kurds are looking to Iraq, and they're looking to Turkey, to the Kurds of Turkey, and potentially one day to the Kurds of Iran. There are 4 states in which the Kurds are an important element and contiguous, right next to each other in all cases. It is possible that the Kurds will have a state. The Kurds had an opportunity almost 100 years ago in the aftermath of World War I, but they didn't have the intellectuals, the politicians to be able to present the case. And they lost the opportunity in 1918, 1919 to form a state. They had a brief opportunity at the end of World War II, that too they lost. And now, for the third and perhaps successful time, they are creating the basis for independent polities and perhaps a state. So the Kurds are off doing their own business. What's left are 2 forces. The government, Alawi-dominated government, with Christians, Druze, and others helping, as well as some Sunnis, and then the Sunni rebels. Now each side, as 2.5 years have passed, has become more religious, more jihadi. The government is supported by the Iranian government, the Islamic Republic of Iran, Shiite, and by Hezbollah, the political and terrorist group based in Lebanon. So the government forces, the government spirit have become ever more Shiite Islamic with the passage of time. Same thing on the opposition side. What began as a somewhat secular Free Syrian Army today is increasingly Islamist, is increasingly jihadi, to the point that there are major battles between the less Islamic and the more Islamic of the rebels, with the more Islamic tied to Al-Qaeda. So what you have, in effect, are jihadis of a Sunni outlook fighting jihadis of a Shiite outlook. From my point of view, don't know about you, this is pretty good. Don't mind seeing jihadis fighting each other rather than fighting us. The problem is that there's a terrible humanitarian cost. There are many people dying. So I think what we should be doing is helping to lessen the humanitarian cost, to encourage in what ways we can that the fighting be outside the cities, pressure the donors, the Russians, the Turks, and others to keep the fighting away from the civilians. But the fighting is going on. It's fairly static. And I would say from our point of view, it's not so bad. It's much better than having either the government or the rebels triumphantly defeat the other side. I think that would be worse for the Syrians and for the neighborhood, should one side be victorious, defeat the other, and go on with its jihadi spirit, whether it's Shiite or Sunni. It looks like things are pretty stable in Syria. Terrible but stable. And finally, Iran, which is the single most important country of the Middle East. I would say Iran is the most important, and Turkey is the second most important. In Iran, many things are taking place. Economic difficulties, there are political tensions, there is a terrorist infrastructure, there is this Shiite Islamist ideology. But the thing that gets all of our attention first are the centrifuges that are turning and whirring away, making uranium, enriched uranium. Now, there are many things we don't know about the Iranian nuclear buildup. We don't know how advanced the buildup is. We don't know how many months it is until they can build nuclear weapons. There are many estimates over the last 20 years. Many of them, most of them, have been wrong. We don't know, most importantly, what Khamenei wants to do. Khamenei is Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, the Rahbar of Iran. He is the key figure. He is not an elected figure, not through elections. He's selected by a small group of religious figures. But he has the ultimate control over the military, over the police, over the intelligence. The president, who is elected, more or less elected, who knows how legitimate the election is. The president deals with the economy, education, religious issues, and so forth. So Rouhani, the new president who was elected in June, is a fairly attractive figure. He has a very nice smile. He's saying things that nobody's been saying before in the Islamic Republic's history. And many are wondering how sincere he is. But I would argue to you that it doesn't really matter whether Hassan Rouhani is sincere or is not sincere. What matters is what Ali Khamenei wants. And here, we don't know. Again, there are several things we don't know. We don't know, is he feeling the pressure from the economic sanctions and the other challenges to his regime, and has decided to give up building nuclear weapons, and Rouhani is the person who is making that happen? Or is he still determined to build nuclear weapons, and Rouhani is the person who will delay the process and reduce the sanctions and make it easier for Iran to build those weapons? I don't know. I suspect it is the latter case. I suspect that this is a trick, basically, that this is not a sincere shift. It is a tactical change rather than a strategic change. It is a way to fool the P5+1, the Western powers, to slow down, reduce the sanctions, make life easier on Iran. We will find out soon enough. But so far, the evidence suggests, given the talks that took place just a week ago, that this is a trick, not a serious change. So one, we don't know how advanced the buildup is. Two, we don't know what Khamenei intends. Three, we don't know what American and Israeli intentions are. I think it's fairly safe to say that Barack Obama does not plan to attack militarily Iran, given what he just did or did not do in Syria in August. Looks like that, but I can't tell you for sure. It looks like the Israelis are likely to do something. If one listens to Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, it sounds like he's intending to do something, but again, who knows? The audience for Obama and Netanyahu is not you and me, it's the Iranians. This could be disinformation. This could be playing games with the Iranians. I don't know. And finally, we don't know what the response of the Iranian population would be to an attack, a military attack. Could it be that the Iranian population will say that these foreigners, Americans, Israelis, are horrible and we are supporting our government, and however many problems we have with our government, we are one with our government? Or could it be the reverse, that they'll say to our foolish government has made so many mistakes and brought on this catastrophe, and we're angry at our government? Don't know. So there's so many things we don't know. What we do know is that the regime in Tehran is apocalyptically minded. It is thinking about the end of days. It is not like any other regime that has had nuclear weapons. Stalin had nuclear weapons. Mao Zedong, Kim Jong-il, horrible, horrible leaders had nuclear weapons. But they were in this world. They were not thinking about the afterlife. It appears that many of the Iranian leaders are thinking about the afterlife, which makes them even more dangerous. Because if you want to bring on the end of days, if you're a Muslim and you are a Shiite Muslim, you want to bring on the end of days, what you do is you create anarchy, chaos, trouble. So what better way to do that than deploying nuclear weapons? So we do know that this is a very, very dangerous regime. We also know that they can't do too much damage without nuclear weapons. The response of the regime to an attack would be some terrorism, might be an attempt to close the Straits of Hormuz, through which 1/6 of the world's energy goes every day. And who knows, they could try other things, but they can't do that much. So long as they don't have nuclear weapons, they are limited in their capacity. And therefore, in conclusion, I would say, given what we don't know, given what we do know, that it is better to have an Iran without nuclear weapons. It is better to do whatever is necessary. Now, economic sanctions are useful. They pressure the regime. But at the end of the day, I don't believe that the regime will succumb, will give in to economic sanctions. Just as the regime in North Korea didn't do that, but allowed a significant number of people to starve to death from hunger in order to build nuclear weapons. I think the Iranian regime will do whatever is necessary. And therefore, I do not think that economic sanctions will be enough. Force is necessary. And I advocate the use of force, assuming that Khamenei is not really making a strategic change. Finally, since I don't know what October's country is, I'll talk about U.S. foreign policy. Since World War II, American foreign policy, whether Democrats or Republicans are in the White House, have been characterized by an activism, leadership. Whether it be NATO or other organizations, whether it be Vietnam or the Kuwait War, or Bosnian or Kosovo, or other wars, the United States has been at the front. And the remarkable shift with Barack Obama is that he does not want to be at the front. I like to say that he does not really want, when it comes to foreign affairs, he does not really want to be president of the United States. He wants to be Prime Minister of Belgium. He wants to be one of the group. He does not want to be the leader. He has now, for 4.5 years, pursued policies that are mild, that are passive, that are self-contradictory. So, for example, in the Middle East, he did not support, in 2009, the Iranian demonstrators against the Iranian government, which is our enemy. But in 2011, he did support the Egyptian demonstrators against Mubarak, who is more or less our friend, someone we work with. In Egypt today, both sides are angry at him and say nasty things about him. In Syria, it looked like he was going to have a strike, and then he didn't do it. In Afghanistan, he put in troops, but said that they'll be gone by a certain date, which militarily obviously makes no sense. You don't put in troops and announce the date when they're going to leave. One sees a policy of incompetence, of inconsistency, and this reflects 2 points. First, Obama and his team are focused on domestic politics. He is the 4th Democrat in a century, Democratic president in a century, to want to fundamentally change the relationship between state and society, to increase the role of the state, diminish that of society. Woodrow Wilson, 100 years ago, Franklin Roosevelt, 1930s and 40s, Lyndon Johnson, 1960s. Each did this, and now Obama is doing it. And the key legislation to achieve that has been the health care package. But there are other issues as well: taxation, immigration, and so forth. He is focused on domestic politics. Foreign affairs are just something you have to do. So he's not really interested, the team is not really interested. They're focused on internal American politics. Secondly, he faces a novel dilemma, something never before faced by an American president. He comes from the far left of the Democratic Party. He comes from a socialist background. And his education, his early years, until he became a politician, were focused on criticism of the United States, domestic and international. He and his wife have both made statements that indicate that they don't like the United States, and they certainly don't support the record of the United States in foreign policy. And so it is strange and difficult for him to be president, because on the one hand he doesn't like the record of the United States in international affairs. On the other hand, he's president, successful, as a great president. These two are not easily made compatible. These are quite contradictory. And I think they go far to explain his ambivalence, his inconsistency in foreign policy. What this means on a practical level for a country like Greece is that you can't count on the United States as you could since 1945. It's not there in the same way. We Americans are learning from month to month what this means. A smaller military, less capable military, inconsistency, and I think there is a very clear message for allies of the United States that you cannot depend on this government as you have historically depended since World War II on American governments. On that happy note, conclude and look forward to your thoughts.
Thank you. Να πω καταρχάς ότι έχουμε εδώ, έχει ετοιμάσει δύο σελίδες. Όσοι θέλουν να γράψουν το όνομά τους και την διεύθυνση email για να μπει στη λίστα, μπορείτε να χρησιμοποιήσετε και την πίσω πλευρά αν γεμίσει. Δώσε εδώ και Βασίλη, όσοι θέλουν. Θα σου εξηγήσει. Λοιπόν, ερωτήσεις. Κύριος Λίτσας.
I'd like to thank you for an interesting analysis and for all your infos regarding Middle East. All right, I will pose two questions, a very brief one, the first one, which is a normative. I would like to have your comment on Saudi's rejection to occupy a non-permanent seat in UN's Security Council, and the interesting, if I may say so, is, as quite rightly you mentioned, on the political rift between Erdogan and his closest friend until July, Gül. What's the role of the Fethullah Gülen in this particular rift? Thank you very much.
Thank you. The Saudi decision to reject the UN Security Council seat, which happened just 3-4 days ago, appears to be the result of a decision by the king. The foreign ministry, the bureaucrats were all prepared. They spent money on this. They actually sent a dozen diplomats to, I think, Columbia University in New York to train them for this. They were all prepared for it. They really wanted it. But the king at the last moment, after the election took place, said, no thanks, we don't want it. And it follows on a similar but smaller symbolic statement when the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia in late September did not give a speech at the UN General Assembly. He was the only one not to do so. He had his 15 minutes, he didn't take it. I think what this reflects on the part of the king is anger over two topics in particular. He mentioned three. He mentioned the Arab-Israeli conflict, but that's 65 years old, or a century old. That's been there for a long time. And nothing much has changed there. In fact, I didn't mention it because nothing much has changed. It's the same old situation. But what really is bothering him is, one, Syria, that the United Nations, and more broadly, the Western powers are not doing something about it, are not getting involved in a serious way. And two, Iran, that there is this new spirit with Iran of discussions and likely reduction in sanctions, and he's angry about that. So it appears that he said no, because he could say no, and he was angry. About Gülen, Fethullah Gülen is, as you probably know, the leader of a huge movement in Turkey and outside Turkey as well. The Hizmet movement, the service movement, which is a very large network of industry, media, and educational institutions, religious institutions, of course. Gülen himself left Turkey in 1998, I believe it was, and lives not far from me, actually, in Philadelphia. I'm in Philadelphia. He lives not far from me in Pennsylvania. He has not returned, although he has been allowed to. And he, too, has distanced himself from Erdogan. So Gül and Gülen, similar names, different people. Abdullah Gül is the president. Fethullah Gülen is the head of this movement. Are both very important, and both have let the world know publicly that they disapprove of what Erdogan is saying. For example, Gül, at the time of Gezi Park in June, said that these are citizens and we have to listen to their protests. Erdogan said they're hoodlums, criminals, fornicators, shut up, go home. Very big difference between them. Gül said, we're a democracy, we have to listen to voices. Erdogan said, I'm in charge for the next 3-4 years, go home, be quiet, you have no right to say anything. Similarly, Gülen, in his most dramatic difference, he criticized Erdogan for the Mavi Marmara incident in May 2010, but in many other ways tensions have risen. So I see this as part of the same topic, which is Islamists who are increasingly dismayed and unhappy with Erdogan, making it known that they don't like what he's doing. And I raise the prospect of the AK party and others saying to Erdogan, thank you very much, you've done a wonderful job for 10 years, time to go. Similar to what the Conservative Party said to Margaret Thatcher in 1991. Thank you very much, it's been a great 12 years, gotta go. I think that's possible.
Just a note, according to AKP's memorandum, Erdogan Erdogan has to leave his place. I mean, you know, because this is the third period, yeah, the third term as prime minister, and you know what he thinks is to go to the presidential position, you know, with an upgraded framework of power. Anyway, thank you very much.
AKP regulations say only 3 terms as prime minister. That can be changed, but those are the regulations. And as you point out, Erdogan's hope has been to strengthen the presidency and to replace Gül in the elections coming up in April of 2014. I believe that the Gezi Park problem has ended that. He is not going to become president. And so the question is, well, he's not going to become president easily, as he was hoping. Does he fight with Gül? Do they compete for this position? Does he say he's going to be prime minister for a fourth term? Does he retire? I don't know. But the next half year is likely to be very important because of the election schedule and the choices before Erdogan.
Thank you for being with us tonight. I just wanted to make two brief observations. The other thing is that maybe Obama's hesitancy is due to the fact that his predecessor made a mess of American foreign policy, so he's trying to, do his best to get things in a better way. And maybe we should be aware of the popular saying, once burned, twice shy, in this case. The other thing I would like to say is that saying that what Obama is doing in the US is resembling socialism is quite far-fetched. I just wanted to give you an example. When the American conservatives talk about the L word, liberalism, for them is the leftists. In Europe, liberals are the center-right. So in no way does this represent, by our standards, a leftist point of view, what Obama is doing. Compare it to Germany, for instance.
Yes, Obama emerged in 2008 as the anti-Bush, in particular on Iraq. Obama said, bad decision, time to leave, and that was very important in his rise to the nomination and the election. And yes, Bush made many mistakes. No argument there. But at least Bush had tried to lead. He may have made mistakes, but he tried to lead. Obama is not trying to lead. He's trying to avoid leadership for the most part. And I, as an American, think that is a wrong decision. I think we are the natural leaders. I don't want the Chinese to be the leaders. I want the Russians to be the leaders. I think it should be us. As for socialism, you may not be aware, but Obama's 20s and 30s were basically in a socialist network. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. It was from the far left of the Democratic Party. Now, that he would be a more mainstream figure in Germany, I agree with you. But that doesn't change the fact that he came out of a socialist milieu. Now, once he started running for office in 2004, once he started running for national office in 2004 for Senate, he moved towards the center. And I would not say that he is acting very differently from other Democratic presidents. But I would say that I think his political views are very far left in the American spectrum. Granted, they would not be so far left in Europe, but we're talking about the United States. This is exceptional. There has not been an American politician with this set of views who has reached the presidency before. They've been critical of American actions, specific actions, but we are all critical. Who thinks that the United States has always done the right thing? We're all critical of something or other. But Obama brings that criticism to a higher level. It's much more fundamental. And I think it is critical to understand his foreign policy.
Wasn't Roosevelt a radical, though, by that same
Was
token?
Roosevelt a radical?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. On domestic policy, Roosevelt was quite radical, but certainly not international.
At the Department of International and European Studies. I would like to ask you about Erdogan. You said that he is dangerous to the neighbors of Turkey, but he's also dangerous to his own country. So to what extent could he prove to be a liability for Turkey? Could he prove to be as dangerous for his country as Milosevic or Saakashvili or Hussein, in which case he would be a blessing for his neighbors?
I agree with you that Erdogan is a danger to Turkey as well as neighbors of Turkey. Completely agree. And that's why I think that other politicians are distancing themselves and rejecting him and his views increasingly. But he's very popular, and he is the outstanding politician of Turkey. Has been really none other like him since Ataturk. This is a dominant figure. And I would go further and say that he sees himself, I imagine, he hasn't told me, but I imagine he sees himself as the politician who undoes what Ataturk did. Ataturk moved the country this way, Erdogan moves it that way. He is the anti-Ataturk in terms especially of religion, the role of Islam, and attitudes towards the West. So I agree. He has great ambitions, and he could do very great damage to Turkey. I would be hesitant to compare him to Milosevic or Saddam Hussein. He has not shown himself to be a killer, to be a butcher, to be a monster. Can't say it's impossible, but I would be more inclined to see him as a strong man who wants to control, who wants to tell people what to do. For example, he has television shows that he likes and television shows that he doesn't like, and he lets it be known what he likes and doesn't like. And he wants to influence whether people watch these shows. He tells women how many children they should have. A couple of years ago it was 3, and recently it's 4. You name it. Whatever the topic is, he has opinions, he expresses himself, he gets in the way of people's lives, whether it be alcohol, or what to wear, what work to do, and so forth. And people are annoyed with him, or don't like this. It is less his Islamism and more his autocracy. It is more his impulses to dominate. But I don't see him as a monster, as these figures that you mentioned are. I can't promise you he wouldn't be, but he's a problem, but he's not that much of a problem, I don't think.
Okay, my name is wonderful speech. So my question is this. First, you said about the demonstrations in Turkey, and I would like to add that during those demonstrations, the military forces was going to help the civilians who was forced to stop them by the police, and we see that action. Next, you said about Egypt, how Morsi was shut down by the military forces of Egypt. Okay, so combining them, do you think, your opinion, that that act of the military forces was a failure act of a coup? And if that's so, do you believe that in the next crisis that strikes Turkey, the next demonstrations, is it possible for the military forces, the army, to take control of the situation there? Thank you.
So the question is, might the Turkish military overthrow Erdogan? Probably not. The Turkish military intervened several times in the 20th century. 1960, 71, 80, 97. And in each case, it was the chief of staff, it was the head of the military, who pushed aside temporarily the civilian president, prime minister, president. And in each case, the military left, adjusted the system, and withdrew from politics. The military has a very clear and strong sense that it is the inheritor of Ataturk's legacy. And throughout a Turkish military officer's career, he sees pictures, he hears quotes, he's inspired by Ataturk's model. Ataturk, Ataturk, Ataturk. And so when the politicians or the street demonstrators are making mistakes in their eyes, they would say, Ataturk wouldn't accept this, we must fix it. But the key point is it was the chief of staff, it was the head of the military. It was not some junior figure going to the radio station or the television station and having a coup, as was the case, for example, in Syria or Iraq. That possibility is almost over, completely closed. I didn't mention earlier, thank you for reminding me, one of Erdogan's successes was to take power away from the military, or more broadly from what's called the deep state. The military, the intelligence services, the police, so that they are no longer in a position to engage in a coup d'etat, overthrow the